Joining me now, Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein of California. If I can kind of recap for you this morning on the debt crisis. The Treasury Secretary has told us that the current plan that the Speaker has been working on, which is sort of a two-phase plan for raising the debt ceiling tied to spending cuts, is unacceptable at the White House because it does not bring the debt crisis past the next election. And we've heard the Speaker say, you know what, we're perfectly willing to go ahead on that plan without the help of Democrats on the House side. That then puts it back in the Senate. Right. So I want to gauge your optimism here. You've been around Washington. You and I have both been around Washington for a while. Are you more or less optimistic that we're going to come up against August 2nd and have a deal?
Well, what I'm surprised at is the recalcitrance, is the real refusal to understand the position of the United States Senate. Let me give you I represent 37 million people. California is bigger than 21 states and the District of Columbia put together. 15 to 20 million people in my state depend on programs that the Republicans want to take a meat axe, not a scalpel, but a meat axe to. SSI, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare. We need to know how it's done, because it is possible to cut back these programs, but it's going to take some real care and concern to see that it's done so that it hurts people the very least. Now,
so you Republicans see in entitlements cuts. It's just the nature of the cuts you're talking about.
It's the nature of the cuts. It's when and how they come. It's also, I think, how you fund them. We would probably take 3 parts cuts to 1 parts revenues. What we won't do is take $4 trillion in cuts with no additional revenues. We strongly believe that the wealthiest in our society should help with this crisis, that it should be a fair share plan, not just the people who are poor and dependent on these programs. That's not unreasonable.
But it's also, like, for 7 months we've been having this argument.
That's right.
As you know, it's been going on for 7 months. Everyone could argue about who's to blame and all of that, but the reality is we are really up against a deadline here, and the Republicans are determined to go ahead. Where do you see this coming out?
Well, I could tell you in the Senate. The House I can't quite figure out, but the Senate,
that's okay. They can't.
There are now 39 members, bipartisan, that support the Gang of Six proposal.
3 Republicans, 3 senators that have come up with a collection of cuts and revenue.
That's correct, and the revenue enhancements make sense. They would also take the Simpson-Bowles the Simpson-Bowles Commission's tax reform in it. So it's a big, big step forward for the Senate. If that could be wrapped into a proposal that would provide the length of time to do it and do it carefully, I think you have an arrangement. But I think this business of, you know, here you had 2 months of negotiation with the vice president, and the Republican walked out. You had hours of negotiation with the president, and the Republican walked out. They said no to Simpson-Bowles. They said no to the Gang of Six.
In fairness, there were parts of Simpson-Bowles that Democrats also said no to. I mean, we sort of get down to that. But let me, because our time with you is short, I want to move on a little. Let's say you're more or less optimistic you're going to get this debt ceiling thing done. We're going to move on to a different subject.
I am neither. This is the first time in 19 years that I feel that something that can be done very simply is being held hostage for a very high-stakes game.
Let me move you on, because you have a new bill that you proposed called the Respect for Marriage Act, which would undo the Defense of Marriage Act, which defines marriage as between a man and a woman and disallows same-sex couples from having any federal benefits.
That's right.
And why is now the time? Because a lot of people will point out to you that 39 states have banned same-sex marriage. Why is this the time for you to do this?
I'd point out to you that 6 states plus the District of Columbia now support same-sex marriage. Marriage is always a creature of the state for legal reasons. Divorces, inheritances, adoption, all family matters are done by state law. What DOMA did, the Defense of Marriage Act, was in 1993 or 1994. It was passed, and it said you can have none of the federal rights or benefits that come with a state same-sex marriage. In my view, that's both wrong and unconstitutional. That's right. Spousal benefits, certain inheritance rights, all of those things. That's just plain wrong to do it. If a state enacts same-sex marriage, that state is entitled to be able to be treated like any other married state. So we have produced this bill. We have 27 co-sponsors. We had the first hearing this past week. I believe it may be a long march, but I believe it's going to happen.
And when you look at this and you look at what's happening in New York today, do you think that over time this will just be a generally accepted practice? Is that where you're sort of headed, despite what have been some, most recently certainly in state votes, people turning down the idea of same-sex marriage?
Yes, I think so. As time goes on, what I find is more and more people have gay friends, they have gay relatives. People are much more forward with their thinking about this now. I think they're much more open to it. The polls are showing a change in attitude. And the problem here is that if a state says, yes, we're going to countenance same-sex marriage, then all the rights and benefits thereof ought to be due to that relationship.
Federal benefits.
Exactly.
Let me just turn you quickly to Libya, because France seems to has said, listen, if Gaddafi steps down, he can stay in the country. The U.S. also seems to be softening its position. Do you think that's a good idea?
Well, if you're not going to, let me be candid, if you're not going to kill him, take him out. What you want is him out of office. What I want is him out of office and nowhere near the governance of Libya. If he lives in a house and behaves himself, that's not a problem for me. If he leaves the country, that's not a problem for me. But to continue to run this country in the way in which he has, with the favoritism, with the graft, the corruption, practicing acts of terror from time to time, is a big problem.
But we won't really know that, will we, until he's out of office and sitting there,
That's
if he's
right.
going to cause any trouble.
That's right.
Senator Dianne Feinstein, it's always great to have
Thank
you here.
you.
I hope you'll come back.
Thank you, Candy.
Thank you.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
Up next.